I'm delighted to be invited to launch this special number. As Malcolm said, he's given you the background of the journal. This particular number, the motivation grows out of the National Centre of Biography's research dilemma. And I'm sorry, David, I disagree. The lack of ADB articles on convicts, which the First Three Fleets and Their Families project is setting out to remedy. It is also to encourage and to exercise a group of HDR students that we have in the National Centre of Biography working on convict history. So first, I congratulate Malcolm warmly as the journal editor generally, and for the special numbers and for the 6 previous editions. But then I want to congratulate Malcolm and co-editor Matt Cunneen for this particular wonderful bumper crop. It's a really big book of 10 articles and their introduction. And it's useful for anybody who is going to set out to study convict history. Their introduction, Matt's and Malcolm's introduction, skillfully navigates the historiography on convicts and the long history from the first novelised accounts in the 19th century. And it is useful even just for its footnotes for people who are wanting to know the background to where we are at the moment. Their introduction gives the volume unity. Indeed, the collection showcases, I think, unity and diversity. Convict history as forced labour and as the foundational event in Australia's colonial history is dynamic and diverse, and it's reflected in this collection. On the one hand, it provides a window into a range of current projects on convict history around the country, and the workshop has shown this already today. There are a number of clusters of projects around Australia who are all publishing apace, and they approach convict history in slightly various and different ways, and they're brought together under this umbrella of this journal, and it allows us to see the common cause beneath the differences. And today's workshop, as I say, on digital age takes us the conversation a step further. And secondly, it provides an introduction to the range of methodological approaches to studying convict history. While half the articles are by people associated with the National Centre of Biography and ADB, they too vary in their approaches. So I just want to look at those 2 issues, the issue of a conversation, interconnections of research centres and methodological concerns in a little bit more detail. The journal number provides a window into the extent and breadth of current projects that have been pursued by a range of groups, university-based historians and wider citizen historian communities around Australia. In 2007, Hamish Maxwell Stewart led the Founders and Survivors project, began at the Australian Life Courses in Historical Context, and it was one of the first collaborative digital projects of the new digital age. And this wonderful partnership between academics, non-academic researchers, archivists who have been recording and studying the population of Tasmania was based at the University of Tasmania. And it has had a number of convict history spin-offs. One has been led by Janet McCullum, and with demographer Rebecca McKibben's SHIPS project. It was designed to produce a large positographical sample of the Tasmanian convict population built from the transcription of convict records and the wider genealogical and historical research of full shiploads of convicts, 126 of them, and it was based at the University of Melbourne. And Janet McCullum's article opens this collection with the fruits of that project. And then there is a huge cluster of researchers now at the University of New England, a remarkable number of whom are from a heritage and an archaeological background. Digitally focused, Hamish again, and David Roberts and Mark McLean consider the digital collections and the analysis and problems of the records. Much more directly archaeological and showing multi-collaboration as well as interdisciplinarity is the paper on Place and Space by UNE staff, postdoctoral fellow Richard Tuffin and Chair of Archaeology Martin Gibbs. And they, along with the UNE adjunct David Rowe, but also Savannah Sildick, associated with the Port Arthur Historical Site Management Authority. A further network is through Monica Swatches, who has worked on data analysis and interactive network visualisation. associated with the Conviction Politics project at Monash. And it has researchers from universities in Australia, the UK, Ireland, and is in partnership with museums, archives and unions. And this is an international digital history project exploring the impact of radicals and rebels transported as political convicts to Australia, and the patterns of their collective resistance, as well as other groups such as the mass of unfree convict women, which Monica concentrates in her paper in this journal. A separate biographical inspired cluster is the ANU's National Centre of Biography, and I've already mentioned the first 3 Fleets project led by the National Centre of Biography's online manager, Christine Fernan. And she sets out that project in her paper in this collection. That project is examining 4,500 people who set off from England to New South Wales 1787 to 91 and their descendants over 2 generations. The ANU is a small unit that relies on unpaid volunteers from throughout the Australian historical community and has for 60 years to write the biographical entries. And there is yet another University of Tasmanian working group. Kristen Harman is now the chair of the ADB's Tasmanian Working Party, and her work has developed out of a more biographical perspective, particularly on Aboriginal convicts, Australian, Cousin and Māori. And with Anthony Ray, Kristen and their paper in this collection have approached convict recidivism biographically and through family formation. Their subjects are convicts of colour, as is Matt Cunneen's, and another word on this in a minute. Indeed, all these nodes have graduate students working on convict history, and in this volume they're represented by Matt, Patricia Downs and Jennifer Bird. Trish Downs had a military leadership career and approached convict history by way of considering misbehaving troops and their officers. And for others, family histories inspired their biographical research. Jennifer Bird thought that the recidivist convict Robert Richard Knox was part of her children's genealogy, but he wasn't. While the research was serendipitous, she is pursuing it. And Jennifer Brooks builds on the work of her genealogical father, Lawrence Halloran, to concentrate on her great-great-great-grandmother, Lydia Ann or Anna Halloran, the long-term partner of their forebear, Lawrence Halloran, convicted of forgery in 1880 and transported for that and much more. So I think I've mentioned everyone who's been contributed in this volume, and I congratulate them all. 17 authors from a whole range of convict history nodes around the country. And this number shows the current vigour, as well as the network which is developing. There are some wonderful conversations weaving through the volume. For instance, among other things, Kristen Harman's and Anthony Ray's paper tests Janet McCalman's thesis about the importance of begetting progeny as a marker of convicts having successful lives. The corollary of this is Janet's thesis that losing family was a significant setback. What set Australian transported convicts apart from their peers was the fracturing of their family and households by premature death, desertion and delinquency. And Jennifer Brooks' article substantiates the theme Janet sets up about the significance, particularly of the loss of the family breadwinners. So the second issue, what does it all mean methodologically? I applaud the achievement of this number as a whole and its interrogation of the Australian Convicts Archive. Together, the papers in this journal number offer a sober and sophisticated conclusion. Since the 19th century, there's been almost a millenarian search for a perfect historical method. We've had great history, great men history, scientific history. We've had history from below, we've had oral history, we've had feminist history, we've had subaltern history, we've had clear metrics, we have had transnationalism, we've had postmodernism. We've had a whole range of movements. And they've influenced and impacted on all of the papers. But the methods all have their limitations, as well as their opportunities, and whether they be individual or digital or even mixed. Louis Namier, the great prosopographer, suggested that there were 2 main ways to study history in the 1930s. The first he likened to following a stream as a diarist on the move might, noting day by day its twists and turns from the source, say in the hills, through barely billowing land to the delta that fans out to the sea. This is the biographical method in its way. The other was to build across the river's course 2 dams and settle down to study that section's significant detail, which study should include analysis of the water, the riverbed, and absolutely everything. In 1924, Namia built one dam in 1740 and the other in 1783, and he steeped himself in the concerns of the British political nation, accumulating every piece of data that he could about British parliamentarians. He didn't have any footnotes because he said everything he looked at was relevant. This is the prosopography method. And this volume shows that there are many other methods besides this. And as well as that, Matt's papers show you shouldn't restrict yourself to one method. And most convict historians now are using mixed methods, particularly biography and prosopography. But more importantly, the archives in the end do constrain ambition, whatever method you use. Little did the makers of the records realise the importance of the archive for future generations. They collected the records for administrative purposes. Researchers are using them for other methods and other reasons, and this has resulted in many dilemmas which the papers consider. On the one hand, as Malcolm and Matt note, the fragmentary nature of the record means that only vestiges of the past remain. This is true of the written and the archaeological records. The archives of Convict Australia never were intended to be biographical and leave lacunae that are difficult, often impossible, to fill, and most of the individual records paying scant attention to lives before contact with the system and after their release. On the other hand, as Hamish, David and Mark note, you have to read big data deeply and critically too. And in the making of the records, power relations, especially the role of the state, shaped the archive and limited in all kinds of ways. Moreover, quantitative data over time is not statist. As much as historians might wish the archives to give voice to the subaltern, they really do. You have to respect the limits of what cannot be known and navigate around them. The papers agree, secondly, that convict experience was complex, and as Richard, Martin, David and Sabina indicate, it varied even in its place. Not all convicts suffered at the hands of the penal system. Many might not have married and reproduced, but they ate well and lived long. Many were damaged goods and vulnerable. Moreover, as Janet notes, it is more difficult to come to terms with the reality that some convicts were cruel, untrustworthy, compulsively light-fingered, outrageously mendacious, filthy, malodorous, dipsomaniac and deluded. And thirdly, just one more issue or agreement is over the issue that averages and stereotypes tell us next to nothing. We need to examine real groups, and as Malcolm and Matt suggest, the articles on this issue demonstrate historians seeking to reclaim humanity and life stories of Australian convicts. The digital papers, as well as the biographies, suggest variance in the collective experience. The biographical papers show real life. They test the historiography and the models and the prosopography. This explains perhaps the current interest in women's experience and the experience of non-white convicts. Many of the articles in this volume are on them. This work has shown the extent, causes and contingency of the variance by examining outliers' experience. And the next step is to show how establishing that helps us understand the many. So I officially launch the Australian Journal of Biography and History number 7. I congratulate everybody, 17 authors, and all the people who have been proofreading and publicising and involved in it. What a fine collection. Congratulations.